My name is Camilla, and this is the story of how my own brother destroyed me. My brother on stage holding a microphone. "The company you built," he said, "actually belongs to our parents. And they just gave it to me." The room erupted in applause. My parents stood there smiling. They didn't look at me, not once. That night I lost everything. My company, my home, my family, all gone in 60 seconds. But here is what they didn't know. Here is what they could never have predicted. I disappeared that night, and I spent the next 6 years becoming someone else. Someone they would never see coming. You know, there are moments in life that are so perfectly, brutally clear that they etch themselves into your memory forever. You can recall the temperature of the air, the sound of a glass clinking in the distance, the exact shade of your mother's lipstick. For me, that moment was the family gala. It was meant to be a celebration. The 10th anniversary of the company I built with my own 2 hands, my own sleepless nights, and my own broken heart. Instead, it became the night my brother stole it all, and my parents helped him do it. My name is Camilla, and this is the story of how I learned that blood is not thicker than water, especially when there's money in the water. It's a story about betrayal, about picking up the pieces, and about the long, slow, sweet burn of revenge. It didn't happen overnight. It took years. And it started with a single, earth-shattering sentence. The gala was held at the Grand Vista Hotel, a glittering palace of marble and chandeliers that overlooked the whole city. I remember standing in front of the full-length mirror in my hotel suite, adjusting the strap of my emerald green gown. It was my power dress, the one I wore when I had to close a big deal, and tonight I felt like I needed it. I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach, which was silly. This was a party. My party. My parents, Richard and Alina, had been so proud when I told them about the plans. My mother had helped me choose the flowers, white roses and eucalyptus, simple and elegant. My father had personally called the hotel to confirm the menu. They were my biggest supporters, or so I thought. Then there was my brother, Mark. My older brother by 3 years. Mark had always been the golden child, the one who got the new car on his 16th birthday, while I got a used one. The one whose college tuition was paid for in full while I had to scrape by on scholarships and part-time jobs. The one our parents always made excuses for. He was finding himself when he dropped out of college. He was entrepreneurial when he burned through his inheritance from our grandmother on a failed food truck. He was just figuring things out while I was building an empire. I loved my brother, I truly did, but there was always a part of me that resented the way the world tilted in his favor. When we were kids, if we both fell off our bikes, my mother would rush to Mark first, checking his scraped knee while I sat on the sidewalk, waiting my turn. If we both brought home good grades, my father would pat Mark on the back and say, "That's my boy," while giving me a simple, "Good job, Mija." It was small, subtle, 1,000 tiny paper cuts of favoritism that I learned to live with. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I didn't need their approval. I would make my own way. And I did. My company, Solstice Designs, started in my tiny studio apartment. I was a graphic designer, and I had an idea for a new kind of project management software for creative teams. I coded the first version myself, surviving on ramen and coffee. I pitched it to anyone who would listen. I got rejected 100 times, but I believed in it. And finally, a small venture capital firm took a chance on me. From there, it grew, slowly at first, then like wildfire. 10 years later, Solstice was a multi-million-dollar company with over 200 employees. We had offices in New York, London, and Tokyo. And I had done it all on my own. Mark, meanwhile, had bounced from one get-rich-quick scheme to another, always with our parents bailing him out. I took a deep breath and checked my reflection one last time. My dark hair was swept up in an elegant twist, and my eyes, the same brown as my father's, looked tired but hopeful. I was hoping tonight would be a turning point. Maybe now that I had proven myself, my parents would finally see me, really see me. And maybe, just maybe, Mark would be happy for me. The ballroom was a sea of people. I saw my investors, my employees, my friends, all dressed in their finest. A jazz band played softly in the corner. The air hummed with conversation and laughter. I spotted my parents near the bar. My mother was wearing a stunning navy blue gown, and my father looked distinguished in his tuxedo. They waved at me, their faces beaming with pride. My heart swelled. I made my way over to them, accepting congratulations and handshakes along the way. "Camilla, darling, you look beautiful," my mother said, kissing my cheek. Her perfume, Chanel No. 5, was so familiar it almost made me tear up. "We are so proud of you, Mija," my father said, using the Spanish term of endearment he'd used since I was a little girl. He squeezed my hand. "Your abuelos would have been so proud." "Thank you," I whispered, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the champagne. "Where's Mark?" I asked, glancing around. My mother's smile tightened just a fraction. "He's here. He wanted to make a toast later. He has some exciting news to share." Exciting news? My stomach did a little flip, not of excitement but of unease. Mark's exciting news always came with a price tag attached. I pushed the thought away. Tonight was not the night for cynicism. The next hour was a blur of smiling, networking, and making small talk. I gave a short speech, thanking my team and everyone who had believed in me. The applause was thunderous. I felt, for the first time in a long time, truly happy. Then, the band stopped playing, and a familiar, booming voice came over the microphone. "If I could have everyone's attention, please." It was Mark. He was standing on the small stage where the band had been playing, holding a microphone. He was dressed in a sharp, expensive-looking suit, but it was a little too tight, a little too flashy. His smile was wide, but it didn't reach his eyes. He looked like a shark. My parents had moved to stand near the stage, and they were looking up at him with an expression I couldn't quite read. Was it pride? Nerves? Anticipation? "I just want to say a few words about my little sister, Camilla," Mark began, and the room quieted. "We've all seen her incredible success with Solstice Designs. We've all watched her build this amazing company from the ground up. And we are also so proud." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. He was a good speaker, I had to give him that. He knew how to work a room. "But," he said, and the word felt like a needle scratch on a record. "What you might not know is the story behind the story, the secret ingredient to Camilla's success. And tonight, I think it's time that secret came out." A cold dread began to creep up my spine. What was he doing? I looked at my parents. My mother was looking down at her hands. My father was staring straight ahead, his jaw tight. "You see," Mark continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone, "Camilla had a lot of talent, a lot of drive. But talent and drive don't pay the bills. They don't get you a meeting with a venture capitalist. They don't keep the lights on in the early days. And that's where our amazing parents, Richard and Alina, came in." The room was utterly silent. I could feel 1,000 pairs of eyes on me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would break my ribs. While Camilla was busy working, our parents were busy working behind the scenes. They believed in her, sure. But more than that, they believed in the idea. And they believed it was a family idea. So, quietly, secretly, they became the silent investors in Solstice. They provided the initial capital, the seed money, that got this whole thing off the ground. They mortgaged their house, they used their retirement savings. They did it all for their daughter, and, as a family, they did it for all of us. The room erupted in a wave of murmurs. I felt the world tilt on its axis. Silent investors. Seed money, it was a lie, a complete and utter lie. I had funded the first year myself. I had maxed out credit cards. I had taken out a small, high-interest loan from a bank, not my parents. My parents had never offered me a dime. They had always been too busy saving their money for Mark. Mark held up a hand, and the murmuring subsided. "And that's why," he said, his smile widening into a triumphant grin, "to ensure the future of the company our family built together, our parents have made a decision. They have transferred their majority shareholding in Solstice Designs to me." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun, transferred their majority shareholding. But they didn't have any shares. I owned 60% of my company. My investors own the rest. How could they transfer something they didn't have? And then, the worst part. Mark looked directly at me, his eyes glinting with a malice I had never seen before. "So let's raise a glass," he said, lifting his own. "To Camilla for the hard work, and to our parents for the vision, and to the new chapter for Solstice Designs as a true family business." He raised his glass, and a smattering of confused, hesitant applause followed. People didn't know what to do. They looked from Mark, beaming on stage, to my parents, standing like statues, to me, frozen in the middle of the room. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the ballroom. My legs felt like they were made of lead. I saw my head of engineering, a man named David who had been with me since the beginning, looking at me with a mixture of shock and concern. I saw my investors, their faces pale and questioning. Then I saw my father. He finally looked up and met my eyes, and in that look I saw everything: shame, guilt, and a desperate, pleading look that said, "Please don't make a scene. Please just go along with it." Something inside me shattered. It wasn't a clean break. It was 1,000 tiny fractures, a million little pieces of my heart and my trust scattering on the marble floor. I don't remember walking out. I don't remember the gasps or the whispers. I just remember the cold night air hitting my face as I stumbled out the hotel's service entrance, my beautiful emerald gown dragging through a puddle. I leaned against the cold brick wall and I was sick. I don't know how long I stayed there, slumped against that wall, shivering in my ruined dress. Eventually, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was David, my head of engineering. His kind face was full of worry. "Camilla," he said softly, "come on, let me take you home." He drove me to my apartment in silence. I stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past. The city I had conquered. The city that had just watched me fall. When we got to my building, David walked me to my door. "Camilla, whatever they said, it's not true, is it?" he asked. I shook my head, unable to speak. "I know," he said. "I was there, remember? I was there in your studio apartment when you were coding on a laptop balanced on a milk crate. I know who built this company. We all do. Don't forget that." His words were a small comfort, a tiny light in the overwhelming darkness. I thanked him and went inside. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on my couch, staring at the wall, replaying the scene over and over in my head. The next few days were a blur of lawyers and phone calls I couldn't bring myself to answer. It turned out my parents had forged my signature. Years ago, when I was first starting out, desperate and naive, they had asked me to sign some documents. "Just in case," my father had said. "To protect you." I was so young, so trusting. I hadn't read the fine print. They were documents that gave them power of attorney over my business affairs in the event of an incapacity. They had then used that power to create a fake investment agreement, backdated to the company's founding, giving them a 40% stake. Combined with a few minor shareholders they had managed to convince or buy off, they had scraped together enough to claim a majority. The legal battle was a nightmare. My word against theirs. Their perfectly forged documents against my memory. In the eyes of the law, it was my parents' word against mine. And parents, it seemed, were always believed. I lost. The company I built was no longer mine. Mark was the new CEO. My parents, in a statement to the press, said they had done it for the good of the family and that I would always have a place at Solstice. A place. They were offering me a job, a corner office, a salary. Like I was some employee they were doing a favor. I remember sitting in my now empty apartment, the one I had bought with my own money, staring at the eviction notice. It was part of the settlement. The company assets, they argued, had been built with family money. That included my apartment, my car, my savings. They took it all. Everything except a small bank account I had opened when I was a teenager that my parents didn't know about. There was about $5,000 in it. It was all I had left. For a month, I didn't leave my friend's spare room. I didn't answer my phone. I didn't eat. I just lay there, replaying that night over and over in my head. My brother's smug face. My father's pleading eyes, my mother's silence. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, it felt like a physical weight on my chest. I had lost my company, my home, my savings, and my family in one single night. The people who were supposed to love me, to protect me, had systematically robbed me of everything I had ever worked for. The grief eventually, slowly, turned into something else. A cold, hard kernel of rage. It started small, a flicker in the darkness. But I nurtured it. I fed it. I thought about Mark, sitting in my chair in my office, taking credit for my work. I thought about my parents, enjoying the dividends from a company they had never lifted a finger to build. I thought about their lies, their smug faces in the newspaper articles that called them visionary parents, and Mark a dynamic new CEO. And I started to plan. The first thing I did was disappear. I told my friends I was moving to the coast to clear my head. Instead, I rented a tiny, furnished apartment on the other side of the city, in a neighborhood so different from my old one that it felt like another country. I used a fake name. I paid in cash. I became a ghost. The second thing I did was get a job, not in tech. I couldn't bear to even look at a computer screen. I got a job as a waitress at a diner called Frankie's that was open 24 hours. It was hard, physical work. My feet ached, my back hurt, and the tips were barely enough to cover my rent. But it was perfect. It kept my hands busy and my mind focused on something other than my hatred. And it allowed me to observe. People are fascinating when they think you're invisible. They talk freely in front of waitresses. They let their guard down. I learned to be invisible. I learned to listen. And I learned that revenge isn't a sprint. It's a marathon. It's a chess game played over years, not days. Frankie's became my sanctuary and my classroom. Frankie himself was an old Greek man with a thick accent and a heart of gold. He didn't ask questions when I showed up looking for work. He just handed me an apron and told me to start wiping down tables. The other waitresses, Rosa and Darlene, became my friends without knowing my real name. They taught me how to balance 3 plates on one arm, how to deal with rude customers, and how to spot the ones who would leave a good tip. In the quiet hours between 3 and 5 in the morning, when the diner was empty, except for a few lonely souls nursing cups of coffee, I would sit in a booth with my notebook and plan. For the first year, I just watched. I read every article written about Solstice. I followed Mark's social media, watching his every boastful post. I saw him driving a new sports car, dating a series of models, throwing lavish parties. I saw my parents, beaming in photos at charity galas, their newfound wealth and status on full display. They had sold their souls and they were proud of it. The anger inside me grew, but I kept it leashed. It was my fuel, but I couldn't let it burn out of control. I also kept an eye on my old friends and colleagues. Most of them had been pushed out of Solstice within the first 6 months. Mark didn't want anyone around who remembered how things really were. David, my head of engineering, had started his own small software company. It was struggling, but it was alive. I made a mental note of that. Others had scattered to different companies across the city. My network, the people who truly believed in me, was still out there. They just didn't know I was watching. In the second year, I started to dig. I used my old skills, the ones I had honed building Solstice. I was a master of information. I knew how to find things. Using my small savings and my laptop from the local library, I began to build profiles. Not just on Mark, but on everyone around him. His new girlfriend, a vapid socialite named Tiffany. His business partners, a pair of slick, eager investors who were in it for a quick flip. His new head of development, a man I had personally fired from Solstice years ago for cutting corners. I created a digital scrapbook of their lives, their secrets, their weaknesses. I spent countless nights in that library, hunched over my laptop, digging through public records, social media profiles, and business filings. I became an expert in the art of online reconnaissance. I learned that people leave digital footprints everywhere, and most of them have no idea how much they're revealing. Mark's investors, for example, had a habit of posting their vacation photos in real time, which told me when they were out of the country and unreachable. Tiffany, his girlfriend, had a private blog where she poured out her frustrations about being treated like an ornament. I read every word. It was in the 3rd year that I found my first real weapon. Mark's girlfriend, Tiffany, was not as vapid as she seemed. She was smart, ambitious, and deeply unhappy. Mark treated her like an accessory. I started to frequent the same fancy coffee shop she went to every morning. It took weeks of small smiles and polite nods before I engineered a meeting. I accidentally spilled my coffee near her table. She was kind about it, helping me clean up. We started talking. I introduced myself as Mila, a freelance writer. We became friends. Becoming friends with Tiffany required a level of acting I didn't know I was capable of. I had to bury my hatred for Mark deep inside and genuinely connect with this woman who was, in many ways, as much a victim of his narcissism as I was. We would meet for coffee twice a week. She would tell me about her day, her frustrations, her dreams of opening her own art gallery. I would listen, offer advice, and slowly, carefully steer the conversation toward Mark. Tiffany was a fountain of information. She complained about Mark constantly, his arrogance, his drinking, his terrible business decisions. She told me about the pressure he was under from his investors. Solstice, under his leadership, was floundering. He had no vision, no creativity. He was riding on my coattails, but the coattails were fraying. He was making desperate, risky moves to try and keep the stock price up. He comes home at 2 in the morning, reeking of whiskey, Tiffany told me one afternoon, stirring her latte absently. He yells at the TV. He's always on the phone, always fighting with someone. It's exhausting. I'm sorry, I said, my voice full of false sympathy. That sounds really hard, she shrugged. I don't know why I stay. I guess I keep thinking the old Mark will come back, the one I fell for at the beginning. But I'm starting to think that Mark never really existed. I nodded, hiding my satisfaction. The cracks were showing, and where there are cracks, there is leverage. And then she told me about the St. Regis project. It was a huge contract, a potential game changer for Solstice. It was with a massive hotel chain, and if Solstice landed it, it would secure them for another decade. Mark was staking everything on it. He had promised his investors it was a done deal. It wasn't a done deal. I knew the CEO of the St. Regis chain, a man named Arthur Sterling. He was a client of mine from my Solstice days. I knew he was a man of principle, old school, who valued integrity above all else. I also knew something else. The head of the selection committee for the St. Regis project was a man named Harold Finch. And Harold Finch, I had discovered through my digging, was Mark's secret drinking buddy. They went to the same exclusive, members-only bar. I had photos. I had credit card receipts. Mark was trying to wine and dine his way into a contract, using personal friendship to circumvent the proper channels. It wasn't exactly illegal, but to a man like Arthur Sterling, it would be a deal-breaker. This was my first move. I wrote an anonymous, meticulously detailed letter to Arthur Sterling. I didn't accuse Mark of anything illegal. I simply laid out the facts. I detailed the friendship between Mark and Harold Finch. I provided dates, times, and locations of their meetings. I included a copy of a bar receipt showing Mark had paid for a $2,000 bottle of whiskey. I framed it as a concerned industry insider who believed in fair play. I mailed it from a different state. 3 weeks later, the news broke. St. Regis had awarded the contract to a different, smaller company. The official reason was a better strategic fit. But the rumor in the industry was that the selection process had been compromised. Harold Finch was quietly let go. Mark was furious. His investors were livid. The stock price of Solstice took a nosedive. It was a small victory, a pinprick, but it was mine, and it felt wonderful. I celebrated that night at Frankie's with a slice of apple pie and a cup of coffee. Rosa noticed my smile and asked what had me so happy. I just said I was having a good day. She didn't push. That was the beauty of Frankie's. No one pushed. That was the beginning. For the next 2 years, I became the ghost in Solstice's machine. A whisper campaign of carefully planted doubts. A key employee would get an anonymous email hinting at a better job opportunity at a competitor. A potential investor would receive an accidentally leaked memo revealing internal chaos at Solstice. A promising partnership would fall through at the last minute due to a concern about management stability. I was a one-woman wrecking crew, and no one ever saw me coming. Each move required careful planning. I couldn't just send emails from my library computer. I had to use public Wi-Fi networks, burner phones, and prepaid credit cards. I became paranoid about leaving trails. I would take 3 different buses to get to an internet cafe across town. I would wear disguises, a different hat, a different jacket, a different walk. I was no longer Camilla, the tech CEO. I was a ghost, and ghosts leave no footprints. I didn't touch my parents. Not yet. They were the main course. Mark was just the appetizer. I wanted them to watch their precious son fail. I wanted them to see the empire they had stolen for him crumble to dust, piece by piece, with no idea who was responsible. I wanted them to live in fear. The pressure on Mark became immense. He started drinking more. His relationship with Tiffany imploded, and after a very public, very messy breakup, she came to me, crying. I held her, comforted her, and in doing so, learned even more about Mark's shady dealings. He was skimming money, she suspected, moving funds around to hide his failures from his board. It was the opening I needed. He has a second set of books, Tiffany whispered to me one night, her eyes red from crying. I saw them once on his laptop. He was so drunk he left it open when he passed out. I didn't understand everything I saw, but I know he was moving money into some offshore account. He's terrified someone will find out? I patted her hand, my mind racing. Offshore accounts. Skimming. This was bigger than I had imagined. This wasn't just incompetence. This was fraud. This was the kind of thing that could put him in prison. Do you remember anything else? I asked gently. Any names? Any account numbers? She shook her head. It was all numbers and codes. I didn't really understand it. I just knew it was wrong. That's part of why I finally left. I couldn't be around that anymore. I told her she did the right thing, that she deserved better, and I meant it. Tiffany was a good person caught in a bad situation, but I also filed away every piece of information she had given me. It would take time, but I would find those accounts. I would find everything. It was in the 5th year that I set my trap for my parents. They had moved into a gated community, a sprawling mansion that was a monument to their greed. My mother spent her days playing golf and planning charity events. My father had reinvented himself as a successful business consultant, giving talks to small business groups about the importance of family and legacy. The hypocrisy made me sick. I used to drive past their community sometimes, late at night when my shift at Frankie's ended. I would park across the street and just stare at the lights in their windows. I wondered what they talked about behind those walls. Did they ever mention me? Did they ever feel a twinge of guilt? Or had they convinced themselves that what they did was justified, that it was all for the family? I found my weapon in the most unlikely place, my father's past. Before he retired to a life of leisure, he had been a mid-level accountant at a large firm. Nothing special. But during my years of digging, I had discovered something he had tried very hard to bury. 30 years ago, before I was born, he had been implicated in a minor accounting fraud at his company. Nothing was ever proven, and he was quietly let go with a severance package and a non-disclosure agreement. The company didn't press charges to avoid scandal, but the records existed. I had found them in a dusty, forgotten corner of a county courthouse's digital archive. It was a small, insignificant thing, a whisper of a sin from 3 decades past, but in the right hands, it could be a bomb. The right hands belonged to the board of the country club my parents were desperate to join. It was the most exclusive club in the city, a place where old money mingled with new. Acceptance into this club was my mother's ultimate dream, the final stamp of approval on their social ascent. They had been on the waiting list for 3 years. I wrote another anonymous letter. This time, I sent it to the president of the club's membership committee. It was brief and to the point. It stated that a potential member, Richard Vasquez, had a history of financial impropriety that he had failed to disclose on his application. It included a link to the public court records. It suggested they do their due diligence. The rejection was swift and brutal. My parents were not only denied membership, they were publicly humiliated. The story, whispered in the locker rooms and at the dinner tables of the elite, became a cautionary tale. My father's fledgling consulting career evaporated overnight. No one wanted to hire a man with a secret scandal in his past. I watched from a distance as their world began to collapse. My mother stopped going to her charity events. My father stopped leaving the house. They were prisoners in their own gaudy mansion, and the walls were closing in. I should have felt satisfied. I had struck a blow against the people who had betrayed me, but watching my parents' downfall brought me no joy. It only reminded me of what I had lost. They were strangers to me now, but they were still the people who had raised me, who had tucked me into bed at night, who had taught me to ride a bike. Somewhere deep inside, there was still a little girl who loved them. That little girl was in pain, and I couldn't comfort her. By the 6th year, Solstice was on life support. The stock was trading at pennies. The best employees had long since fled. The offices in London and Tokyo were closed. Mark was a laughingstock in the industry, known for running a once-great company into the ground. The investors who had backed him had lost millions. They were circling, looking for blood. I followed the news closely. Every quarterly report was worse than the last. Every new product launch was a failure. Mark was flailing, making desperate decisions that only made things worse. He fired anyone who disagreed with him, surrounding himself with yes-men who told him what he wanted to hear. The company was bleeding money, and there was no one left to stop the hemorrhage. It was time for the final move. I had spent the last year building a new identity. I was now Alina Vance, a successful businesswoman from Europe, looking to invest in struggling American tech companies. I had a fake passport, a fake bank account with money I had saved and carefully invested over the years, and a fake, brilliant backstory. I had help from a forger I met at Frankie's, a quiet old man named Giuseppe who had once been an artist and had a talent for creating beautiful, convincing lies. He did it for the story, he said, for the art of it. Giuseppe was a regular at the diner. He would come in every night at 2 in the morning, order a cup of black coffee and a piece of cherry pie, and sit in the corner booth for hours, sketching in a leather-bound notebook. We started talking during the slow shifts. He told me about his life in Italy, his career as a commercial artist, and his eventual descent into the world of forgery. He wasn't a criminal, he insisted. He was an artist who simply applied his skills to a different canvas. When I finally confided in him, telling him my real name and my story, he listened without judgment. Then he nodded slowly and said, "I will help you, Camilla. Not because I want money, but because I believe in justice. What they did to you was wrong, and wrongs must be righted." He created my new identity with the care of a master painter. He aged the documents, added the right watermarks, even included a few minor imperfections to make them look authentic. When he handed me my new passport, it felt real in my hands. I was Alina Vance. I had a history, a past, a life. It was the most liberating and terrifying feeling I had ever known. I approached the desperate investors of Solstice. I, Alina Vance, offered them a lifeline, a cash infusion that would save them from complete ruin. In return, I wanted a controlling interest in the company. They were so desperate, they agreed without asking too many questions. It was a hostile takeover, but a friendly one from their perspective. They were saved. They didn't care who owned the ship as long as it didn't sink. The negotiations took months. I had to be careful, patient. I couldn't appear too eager. I let them come to me, let them think they were convincing me to invest. I played the role of the reluctant savior, the wealthy European with more money than sense. They bought it completely. The deal was signed. I, Camilla, now owned my company again through the shell corporation of Alina Vance. I owned the name, the patents, the scraps that were left. But most importantly, I owned the debt. I owned Mark's employment contract. The day the deal closed, I went to Frankie's and told Frankie I was leaving. He didn't ask why. He just shook my hand, wished me luck, and told me there would always be a plate of pie waiting for me if I ever came back. Rosa and Darlene cried. I promised to stay in touch. I meant it, but I also knew that my life as Mila the waitress was over. It was time to be Camilla again. I summoned Mark to the main office. It was a sad, hollowed-out version of the vibrant place I had built. Half the desks were empty. The plants were dead. The air smelled of dust and failure. I sat in my old office, the one Mark had taken from me. I sat behind my old desk, and I waited. The door opened and Mark walked in. He looked terrible. He was thinner, his expensive suit hanging loosely on his frame. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he had a nervous twitch in his jaw. He was a shadow of the smug, triumphant man who had destroyed me 6 years ago. He looked at me, and for a moment, he didn't recognize me. I had changed my hair, my style. I was harder, leaner. The softness in my eyes was long gone. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice hesitant. "I'm Mark Vasquez, the CEO." I didn't say anything, I just looked at him. I let the silence stretch, watching the confusion grow on his face. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Please, have a seat, Mark," I said, my voice calm and level. He sat down, still looking confused. I want to thank you for the investment. We have a lot of potential here, we just need a little guidance. I have a new business plan, I think you'll be very impressed." I leaned back in my chair. "I'm sure you do. You've always had a lot of plans, haven't you, Mark? Grand, ambitious plans. You're very good at taking credit for other people's work." He frowned. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." I reached up and pulled the clip from my hair, letting it fall around my shoulders. I leaned forward into the light. "Look at me, Mark," I said. He stared, and then, slowly, the color drained from his face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. In a way, he had. "Camilla," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Hello, brother." He shot to his feet, knocking the chair over. "This is a joke. This is some kind of sick joke. You're dead. You disappeared." "I didn't disappear," I said, my voice still calm. "I've been here the whole time. Watching. Waiting. You took everything from me, Mark. My company, my home, my life, you and Mom and Dad. You stole it all. And you did it with a smile on your face. It wasn't like that, he stammered, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape route. It was a business decision. Mom and Dad, they thought it was for the best, for the family. For the family, I repeated, the words tasting like poison. You destroyed the family, Mark. You used our parents' greed and their blind love for you to rob me. And then you ran my company into the ground. You took my dream and you turned it into this. I gestured at the empty, dying office around us. He started to panic. Okay, you've made your point, you're back, you can have it. I'll resign, I'll walk away. You can have the company, it's yours. I smiled. It was a cold, thin smile that didn't reach my eyes. Oh, I know it's mine. It's always been mine. But you're not going to just walk away, Mark. You see, I didn't just buy the company, I bought your contract. And your contract has a very interesting clause, a morality clause. His face went from pale to ashen. What? It's standard in most executive contracts. It allows the company to terminate your employment without severance for any act of moral turpitude, fraud, or dishonesty. And I have a file mark this thick. I held my thumb and forefinger about 2 inches apart, documenting all the little ways you've been dishonest over the last 6 years. The money you skimmed, the expenses you falsified, the insider tip you gave to a friend. It's all here. I can either use it to fire you for cause, leaving you with nothing, or I can use it to press charges. The choice, for once, is yours. He collapsed back into the chair, his head in his hands. He was broken. It was exactly what I wanted to see. But it didn't bring me the joy I thought it would. There was no joy. There was only a profound, bone-deep weariness. What do you want me to do? He whispered. I want you to sign a document, I said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the desk. It's a full confession. It details how you and our parents conspired to forge documents and steal my company. It's short, it's simple, and it's true. Sign it and you walk away with nothing. You don't get a cent. You don't get a reference. You just get to leave. Don't sign it, and I will bury you so deep in legal proceedings that you will never see the light of day again. And I will make sure every newspaper in the city runs the story. He looked at the paper, his hands trembling. They're your parents too, Camilla. No, I said, my voice hardening. They stopped being my parents the night they stood on that stage and watched you destroy me. They made their choice. Now you have to make yours. He picked up the pen. His hand hovered over the paper. For a long moment, I thought he might refuse, but Mark was a coward. He always had been. He signed his name with a shaky, almost illegible scrawl. I took the paper, folded it carefully, and put it in my pocket. Get out, I said. He stumbled to his feet and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the handle, his back to me. What are you going to do with it? He asked, his voice hollow. That's not your concern anymore, I said. Close the door on your way out. He left. The door clicked shut. I sat there in the silence of my reclaimed office, holding the confession of the man who had tried to destroy me. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty. I had my company back, but it was a hollow shell. I had my revenge, but it tasted like ashes. I sat there for a long time, staring out the window at the city lights. I thought about my parents, sitting in their gilded prison, their reputation in tatters. I thought about Mark, a broken man with nothing. I had one. But what had I won? A company I would have to rebuild from the ground up, a life I would have to start over, a family that was gone forever. The next day, I went to see them, my parents. I drove to their mansion and parked outside the iron gates. I didn't go in. I just sat in my car and watched. I saw my mother, a tiny figure, walking alone in the vast, manicured garden. She looked old. She looked sad. For a moment, just a moment, I felt a flicker of something that might have been pity. But then I remembered the gala. I remembered her silence. I remembered the forged documents. And the pity died. I took out Mark's confession from my pocket. I had made a copy. I slid it into an envelope addressed to them. I got out of the car, walked to the gate, and dropped it in their mailbox. Inside, I had written only 2 words on a separate card, for the family. I got back in my car and drove away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew what that letter would do to them. It would be the final, crushing blow. It would show them that their golden child had not only failed, but had betrayed them to save his own skin. It would show them that their daughter, the one they had sacrificed for their son, was the one holding all the cards. It would show them that their family, the one they had claimed to be protecting, was a lie. My revenge was complete. It was not sweet. It was not satisfying. It was just done. A week later, I received a letter. It was from my mother. I recognized the elegant handwriting on the envelope. I almost threw it away unopened, but something made me tear it open and read. "Camilla," it began, "I don't expect you to forgive us. I don't expect you to ever want to see us again, but I need you to know that I am sorry. I am sorry for every moment of every day. Your father is sick, very sick. The doctors say he doesn't have much time. He wants to see you. He wants to say he's sorry himself. I know we don't deserve it, but I'm asking anyway. Please, come see your father." "Mom," I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. I didn't respond. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself they had made their choice and now they had to live with it, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. My father sick, dying. The man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had walked me down the aisle at my wedding that never happened, who had called me Mija with such love in his voice. The same man who had stood on that stage and let my brother destroy me. I wrestled with it for weeks. I talked to David about it. I talked to Rosa, who I still met for coffee sometimes. They both gave me the same advice. Do what feels right for you, not what you think you should do. In the end, I went. I drove to the small condo where they now lived, the one they had moved to after losing the mansion. I sat in the parking lot for a long time, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Then I got out and walked to the door. My mother answered. She looked so much older than I remembered. Her hair was gray, her face lined with worry and regret. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. "Camilla," she whispered. "You came." I didn't hug her, I just nodded. "Where is he?" She led me to a small bedroom. My father was lying in a hospital bed that had been set up by the window. He was thin, so thin, his skin pale and his eyes sunken. But when he saw me, they lit up with a light I hadn't seen in years. "Mija," he breathed, reaching out a shaky hand. "You came. I didn't think you would come." I stood in the doorway, not moving. "Why did you do it?" I asked. "I need to understand. Why?" He looked at me and tears spilled down his cheeks. "Because we were fools," he said. "Because Mark was our son and we thought we were helping him. Because we were greedy. Because we convinced ourselves that you would be okay, that you were strong enough to handle it. We were wrong. We were so wrong." "Strong enough to handle it?" I repeated, my voice cracking for the first time. "You took everything from me. Everything I worked for. Everything I was, and you gave it to him, and he destroyed it. He destroyed everything." "I know," my father said. "I know, and I have to live with that every day. It's worse than any sickness, Camilla. Knowing what I did to you, knowing I can never take it back." I stood there, staring at the man who had been my hero, my protector, my father, and I felt the anger that had sustained me for 6 long years begin to crack. Not disappear, but crack, just a little. "I brought you something," I said quietly. I reached into my bag and pulled out a copy of Mark's confession. I handed it to him. He read it slowly, his eyes moving across the page. When he finished, he looked up at me, his face a mask of devastation. "He signed this?" he asked. "He signed it to save himself," I said. "He walked away with nothing. He's selling cars now, I hear." My father closed his eyes. "We gave everything for him, and this is what he is. A coward who would sell his own parents to save himself." "Yes," I said, "that's exactly what he is." My mother, who had been hovering in the doorway, let out a small sob. "We were so blind," she said. "So blind." I looked at them, these 2 broken people who had once meant everything to me, and I made a decision. "I'm not here to forgive you," I said. "I don't know if I ever can, but I'm here. I came, that's all I can give you right now." My father reached out his hand again. "That's enough, Mija," he whispered. "That's more than I deserve." I took his hand. It was cold and thin, so different from the strong hand that had held mine when I was a little girl. But it was his hand, and for a moment, just a moment, I was that little girl again. I stayed for an hour. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about small things. The weather. The garden my mother was trying to grow on their tiny balcony. The books my father had been reading. When I left, my mother hugged me. I didn't hug back, but I didn't pull away either. My father died 3 weeks later. I went to the funeral. I stood in the back, away from the small group of mourners. My mother saw me and she nodded. That was all. It has been 2 years since that day. I am Camilla again. I rebuilt Solstice. It's different now, smaller, more focused. I hired back many of the people Mark had fired, the ones who were loyal to me. David is my head of engineering again. We make a good product and we're proud of it. I don't go to galas anymore. I don't give speeches. I just work. It's enough. I see my mother sometimes. We have coffee once a month. It's awkward and painful and sometimes we both cry. But we're trying. That's something, I suppose. Mark moved to another state. I haven't seen him since that day in my office. I don't want to. Sometimes, late at night, I think about everything that happened. I think about the girl I was before the gala, so eager to please, so desperate for her family's love. I think about the woman I became in the years after, fueled by rage and revenge. And I think about who I am now. A woman who has her company back, her life back, but who knows that some things can never be recovered. The family I have now is the one I chose. My friends, my colleagues, the people at Frankie's Diner who knew me as Mila the waitress and never asked any questions. They are my family now. They are the ones who were there for me when I had nothing. So that's my story. The story of the night my brother stole my company and my parents helped him do it. The story of how I lost everything and then, piece by piece, year by year, took it all back. It's a story about betrayal and loss, but it's also a story about survival. It's about learning that the people who are supposed to love you the most can hurt you the deepest, and that the only person you can truly rely on is yourself. And it's a story about how revenge, when it's slow and carefully planned, can be a powerful thing. But it's also a lonely one. I got my company back. I got my life back, but I will never get my family back. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, that is the most punishing revenge of all.